The narco world is extremely tough, and perhaps that's why it's fascinating to so many of us. But when you take a closer look at what makes cartels tough, it can truly make you sick. Trigger warning. The following video discusses very graphic details of torture and murder. From skinning people alive to gouging their eyes out with a spoon, there truly is no limit to narco torture techniques. But how can people become such real-life monsters? Were they ever innocent? We'll explore these questions and the most horrifying torture methods in the cartel world. El Mencho's Clowns.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Today, the CJNG is considered Mexico's bloodiest cartel, and this is thanks to its leader, Namasio Aseguro Caravantes, aka El Mencho. El Mencho was inspired by Los Zetas cartel and its militarized structure. He took it to the next level, arming thousands of violent men with huge rifles, army tanks, and grenades.
And in July, footage would emerge of that CJNG convoy. These gunmen call themselves the Elite Group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho. They're armed with assault rifles with grenade launchers attached to the barrel, heavy machine guns, and also this gun. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. It's a powerful weapon that the CJNG loves to show off.
So the CJNG's main method is intimidation, but they don't just do that with military weapons. El Mencho made sure to employ the worst men you could find, violent teenagers desensitized to violence and willing to do anything to climb the cartel ranks.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
Sometime in the 2010s, El Mencho recruited a horrible human being by the name of Fabián Urbino Morales, aka El Payaso. El Payaso means the clown in Spanish. Creepily enough, Fabián Morales truly did work as a clown at the circus when he was younger. Then, he traded his clown suit for guns, machetes, and knives. But he kept the mask. Fabián Morales used to work for Los Metros cartel, which is a smaller faction of the Gulf cartel. As you already know, the cartel world is violent, but El Payaso's penchant for psychopathic violence was shocking, even for his fellow sicarios. In this place, Mencho and his people recruited them when they saw the way they executed their rivals. They burned them in gasoline drums.
They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them.
Boiling people alive in gasoline drums have become one of the favorite narco torture methods. And yes, sometimes it's not just rival cartels, but their families and their kids as well. But if you thought this was terrifying, wait till you hear how El Payaso grew under El Mencho's care. You see, one of the CJNG's worst habits is posting their horrible torture videos online. That way, they can spread fear and panic to every corner of the world and let everyone know what happens if you mess with them. The problem is, in their eyes, anything means messing with them. If you look at them the wrong way, or if El Mencho felt undermined by something you said, you can suffer the same fate as a sicario. One of the worst things El Payaso and his clown army did is show the Quiero Agua video. In the video, the CJNG clowns have kidnapped a rival cartel member, most likely a former member of La Familia, but the victim had never been identified, as the video begins with a flayed face. Indeed, the 30-second video shows a man inches away from death after the evil clowns had already removed all skin from his face and other parts of his body. But this is not the only gruesome, blood-chilling part of the video. Something that shows the true nature of Morales and his gang is the way the men taunt their victim, mocking him and laughing at his pain. At one point, the men keep asking him if he wants water. But imagine having to talk without a face.
Agua? Dime recio. Que me digas con la boca.
The man wheezes in pain. It's pretty clear he just wants to die. But the clowns keep taunting him, keeping him alive for as long as possible. His voice is raspy and weak, but this only amuses the clowns. Anyone watching that video could easily have a panic attack and years of sleepless nights, but these men were just laughing at it. Moreover, they were the ones that did this to the poor man. You can't call these people animals. Animals only kill to eat. They never torture for pleasure. It's hard to imagine what El Payaso went through as a kid to end up like this. Side note, please don't go looking for this video or other torture videos online. There's nothing good that can come out of this, I promise. Thankfully, El Payaso is now in prison and it's unlikely he will ever walk free again. But some of his clown army is still out there, wreaking havoc and taking pleasure in destroying people's lives. El Payaso left a horrible legacy behind, and skinning people alive is still a method Mexican cartels use today. El Pozolero. Remember the guisos? Horrifically, there's a man who made a career out of this. Santiago Meza Lopez grew up in a poor farmer's family, and his biggest passion was tending to their horses. Ironically, it was his love of animals that brought him to the cartels. Well, that and a desperate need for cash. Santiago started working with the Arellano Felix cartel in 1996. He took care of their horses and did their masonry work. It was honest work that simply paid better compared to anything he could do on his farm. But you know how cartels promise you endless riches for just a little bit of dirty work? That's always the hook. Make a threat, beat someone for not paying up, or carry out a sketchy drug deal. Within months, you'll be rich. Santiago easily fell for this scheme, and somewhere along the way, he started to like it. He was extremely disciplined and loyal to the cartel, and so he slowly got promoted from dealer to drug office keeper. When a bloody war broke out between the Arellano Felix and the Sinaloa cartel, Santiago got an even bigger role. Within just a few years, the war had left 24,000 bodies behind. Now, the Arellano Felix cartel had to find a way to get rid of their victims' bodies. If you leave a body in the open, you give the police a chance to arrest you. So they had to make the bodies truly disappear. In the late 1990s, the Arellano Felix brothers, Ramon and Benjamin, invited Santiago to a secluded spot. They asked him to do a little experiment with them. They handed him a leg of beef and asked him to toss the leg into a container. The vat was filled with caustic soda, also known as lye, mixed with water and some other chemicals. They left Santiago with the container and told him to watch over the beef while they took care of other business. A few hours later, Santiago would confirm their experiment worked out the way they intended it to. The leg of beef was completely dissolved, only coloring the liquid inside the container a crimson red. Yeah, it was gross, but it was nothing compared to what's next. 6 months later, the Arellano Felix brothers revealed to Santiago what the experiment was about. He was going to carry out their dirtiest work, dissolve their enemies into vats of lye. The brothers had asked for advice from foreign cartel members about disposing of corpses. They were in over their heads, quite literally in bodies, and simply dumping them in shady spots wasn't working for them anymore. Now, Ramon and Benjamin had Santiago dissolve his very first human body. Several henchmen were watching. If this worked, this would be their future method for all their enemies. Santiago undressed the body and stuffed it into a large drum, filled it with the same mixture as before, except this time, there were 200 liters of it. The drum's burner was lit up and the mixture started to froth. Santiago left it overnight to cook. When he returned to the vat in the morning, the body was gone, just a red sludge and some tiny bone fragments decorating the bottom of the container. And so El Pozolero was born. Before you ask, no, Pozolero doesn't literally mean soup man. It comes from pozole, a traditional Mexican soup made with corn and meat. I know, El Pozolero ruins the dish forever. After El Pozolero notified the Arellano Felix brothers of their successful experiment, they called in their truck driver. He took the container and drove it to a nearby canyon in the dead of night. He tossed the remains in there and carried the container back to the cartel headquarters. This would be the Arellano Felix cartel's preferred method of dealing with their bodies. And Santiago became their chief cleaner. El Pozolero was in charge of everything, buying oil containers, caustic soda, latex gloves, and gas masks. Yep, everything about this job was simply horrifying, and El Pozolero seemed to be completely desensitized to it. Maybe he was even getting a kick out of it. Now he was working directly under drug lord Teodoro Garcia Semental, aka El Tío. He would send El Pozolero a text message with a location every time he had a new body that he needed to get rid of. El Pozolero would arrive at the specific location, but it wouldn't be a simple exchange. A cohort of cars would pull up. He would be called to find out which car the body was in. Then, 2 henchmen would help El Pozolero carry the body into his car, and then he would drive off to his lab. There, he would take care of the body. Sometimes it would be several bodies simultaneously. When he was done, he would take the bone remains and throw them into huge underground pits. By now, El Pozolero had his own graveyard, and business was booming. in the worst sense of the word. But as always, nothing lasts forever. El Tío was a ruthless, violent, and headstrong man. This caused several hiccups between him and the Arellano Felix brothers. In 2008, it all came to a boiling point. El Tío decided to switch sides and join the biggest rival cartel around, El Chapo and El Mayo Sinaloa. And since El Pozolero was his man, he took him with him. This is how El Pozolero became Sinaloa cartel's chief body disposer too. This is creepy on so many levels. He was now dissolving the bodies of his former colleagues. He didn't seem to care though. El Pozolero made $600 a week, which was an excellent salary in rural Mexico. He was rich and he was a star. I know, it's pretty disturbing that he liked this level of stardom in this context. But his gruesome work stint with the Sinaloa cartel would come to a swift end in less than a year. In January 2009, Mexican authorities tracked him down after an anonymous tip pointed them in his direction. When the officers barged in, he was stirring something smelling horrible. He was dead drunk and slurred his words. When the officers asked him about his concoction, he claimed it was seafood soup. It wasn't.
When the Mexican army rained holy hell on his hideout, and as they whisked him away, a soldier would later recall that he turned and threatened him, saying, "You have no idea who you're messing with."
After his arrest, however, El Pozolero decided to confess.
After his arrest, he also collapsed in tears and pleaded for God's forgiveness. The victims' relatives later stated that his apology was not followed up with genuine willingness to relieve their suffering.
He told the detectives he dissolved around 300 bodies, but it's believed the actual number is over 1,000. The case made the headlines throughout Mexico. El Pozolero was pictured as a macabre soup master who had done the cartel's bidding for over a decade, no questions asked. El Pozolero's wife commented to the media. He would say, "I prefer my job than for my family to die of hunger." It's hard to believe there was really no alternative option for El Pozolero. Perhaps he really liked his job. When he spoke to the detectives about his job, he complained about the physical work. "I was the devil to move them. They weighed a lot. After everything was cleaned up, we stored the barrels. We also washed the drain with hot water because the remains stuck to the pipes." Yeah, that was the problem. They had you carry heavy bodies. With Santiago in prison, the police went on to discover his gruesome burial site, called the Chicken Coop. 250 kilos, or 500 pounds, of bones and bone remains were extracted by 2017. The creepy catch was that the Chicken Coop really was used to raise chickens too. It was a little farm along the free highway to Tecate, and it worked as a perfect mask for El Pozolero's horrible affairs. But only 70 of El Pozolero's many bodies were dissolved at the Chicken Coop. 16,500 liters of human matter had been extracted from all over Tijuana. Human sludge had been poured out from the containers in every empty lot and wooded area. Imagine all the remains that still haven't been found, all the victims that will forever remain nameless, thanks to the cartel's gruesome disposal method. What's worse, El Pozolero taught others how to dissolve bodies. He even installed a drainage system during his last years on the job, making the process cleaner and easier for his disciples. So again, his terrible legacy lives on. In 2012, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. During his trial, he said that he was not a dealer, a killer, or a monster. He was just a man doing his job for a cartel that wouldn't take no for an answer. Indeed, in the cartel world, sometimes quitting a job is taken as betrayal, and you can get a death sentence for that. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather take a death sentence than turn thousands of people into red sludge. El Pozolero never revealed the location of all the other remains, so the victims' families were not pleased with his apology. They said it can't be genuine if he was not willing to help the police. What's more, many of these families were outraged when El Pozolero was released from prison in April 2022. In their opinion, it doesn't matter that he didn't kill his victims. He dissolved 1,000 bodies. His sentence should be much harsher than 10 years. Z-40. The list only gets worse, guys. This is the story of Los Zetas' former leader, Miguel Trevino Morales, known as Z-40. Los Zetas started out as the Gulf Cartel's army. The Gulf's leader in the 1990s, Osiel Cardenas Guillen, hired an ex-army lieutenant, Arturo Guzman de Sena, or Z1, to bring a new level of discipline to his empire.
The first Zeta he recruited was Arturo Guzman de Sena. So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
Decena brought along north of 30 army deserters and a whole new level of violence to modern-day cartels.
So the Zetas really upped the ante of violence within their conflict and their use of terror. I think a lot of this comes from the fact they were from the military and they had this instruction of how you defeat insurgencies, this anti-insurgency training that had originated in the United States, and this idea that you control territories through the use of terror.
The army became so brutal that its generals rewarded violence with honor medals. In 2002, Decena was killed by the Mexican military during the war on drugs. A few years later, Cardenas was arrested and extradited to the US. The government thought this might be the end of the Gulf Cartel, but what happened was Los Zetas took charge as a standalone cartel and started an all-out war with the Gulf. Yep, it was pure chaos, and violence only skyrocketed after this.
You had this small unit which grew and grew, and that is the Zetas inside the Gulf Cartel, until eventually it was like a whole army within the Gulf Cartel that would rise up saying, we don't need you anymore, we're going to take this for ourselves.
From 2010 to 2015, Los Zetas made a name as Mexico's most brutal cartel, leaving piles of mutilated bodies behind them everywhere they went. And at the center of the terror was a man named Miguel Trevino Morales. He was born on November 18, 1970 in Tamaulipas into a family of 13 children. As one of the oldest brothers, Miguel took care of his family after his father abandoned them. Pressed for cash, he entered the criminal world as a young teen. During the 1990s, he worked for the Gulf Cartel drug lord Hector Manuel Sauceda Gamboa, aka El Cariz, who became his mentor. In the late 1990s, Los Zetas hired him for his skills in moving contraband across the border. He lived in Mexico and Texas all his life, and this was his specialty. By 2005, Miguel's job was fighting off insurgents from the Sinaloa cartel in the Nuevo Laredo area. But that's not all he did. Apparently, Miguel was good at grooming young teens into brutal assassins. He called them Zetitas, little Zetas, and had them kill rival sicarios, officials, and anyone who got in the Zetas' way. Some of his Zetitas were 12 years old. Side note, this is how people can become real-life monsters. In 2007, under his boss's orders, Miguel led a vicious ambush in Guatemala, personally killing drug lord Juan Jose Leon Ardon, that earned him the vice general position in Los Zetas, despite his lack of military training. By 2010, when Los Zetas became their own cartel, Miguel already had ambitions to be their leader. According to some sources, he was fighting for the kingpin position as early as Heriberto took over. According to other sources, he was actually ruling Los Zetas, commanding their horrific attacks while the de facto ruler, Heriberto Lascano, took care of more administrative matters. Whichever the case, both men had a great number of followers, and when Heriberto was gunned down by the Mexican military in October 2012, Miguel took over Los Zetas, but Miguel's techniques were truly gut-wrenching. In August 2010, Z-40 had Los Zetas kill 72 undocumented immigrants on a mere suspicion that they might end up recruited by the Gulf Cartel. The next year, he stopped a group of buses headed from Texas to Mexico. Over 200 people were kidnapped and taken to a ranch in San Fernando. There, Miguel and his Zeta sicarios violated dozens of women, forced them into watch, then forced them in to fight each other to the death. Whoever survived would be recruited into Los Zetas, and whoever died, well, they were tortured for hours first. Miguel laughed as he watched this. For him, it was entertaining. Why did Los Zetas do this? Once again, they suspected these people were going to be recruited by the Gulf Cartel. In August 2011, Miguel's men set fire to a whole casino in Monterrey after the casino failed to pay protection money.
Here's a very small sample. Most of it is simply too grisly to show. There was the summary beheading of 200 migrants. The casino fire which killed at least 50. The preferred method of killing involves beheading with chainsaws.
Then, Z-40 took to guizos, and he had his very own recipe.
They burn these individuals in a 55-gallon drum using diesel because diesel burns slower.
Yeah, he would prolong his victims' suffering by slow burning them with diesel. In 2020, the Irish Times reported the discovery of 12 kitchens Los Zetas used to cook humans. The description itself is scarring enough. Bloody handprints on walls, stained clothes, plastic cable ties, machetes, and, as one person observes, the crunch of bones beneath a thick blanket of ash. Miguel was a real-life monster, and sometimes he'd make his own sicarios sick. Reportedly, when he was done with his enemies, he would kidnap their children too and subject them to the same treatment. Indeed, Z-40 boiled babies. He also dismembered people while they were still alive and dumped their bodies in broad daylight for others to see and learn his name. Another monster who was happy to be a star. He'd also escaped several gunfights unscathed, almost as if he had a villain superpower. He would also drive around Mexico with sicarios in his car, casually pointing out pedestrians and telling his sicarios, "Kill this one." In 2013, one of his former hitmen told the press that Miguel couldn't sleep at night if he didn't take a life that day. Another journalist wrote that Miguel sometimes ate his victims' still beating hearts. This was one of his many tactics of instilling fear in his enemies and painting himself as the worst drug lord alive.
They've put them in acid and watched their bodies disintegrate. They have fed them to wild animals.
Indeed, that's another narco torture technique, carving people's chests while they're still alive and removing their hearts. Again, it's unfathomable that a person can do this to another person and somehow get a kick out of it.
3 men kneeling on the ground. They have their hands tied behind their backs and they are blindfolded. I would estimate that the victims are in their late teens to early 20s. They are surrounded by 8 heavily armed sicarios, all wearing combat gear and carrying assault rifles.
Arguably, the worst rumor states that Miguel once put one of his enemy's babies in a microwave. Yeah, you don't recover from that one. On July 15, 2013, Miguel Trevino Morales was finally arrested.
Miguel Trevino Morales was apprehended by the Mexican Marines in Nuevo Leon, near the border of the Tamaulipas state, at around 3:45 a.m. It said that not a single shot was fired.
For some reason, Z-40 managed to dodge extradition to the US. To this day, however, he is serving a life imprisonment sentence in Michoacan federal prison. Los Chapitos. Los Chapitos sounds lighter than El Chapo, right? It's just El Chapo's sons, younger and more innocent than the notorious drug lord. Wrong.
Judy, they are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin. As the I-Team has reported for several years, federal drug investigators here in Chicago consider El Chapo's sons in charge of the Sinaloa cartel that remains this area's largest trafficker of heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines.
Ivan, Jesus, Alfredo, and Ovidio, El Chapo's 4 eldest sons, are considered in charge of the Sinaloa cartel, in a separate faction from El Mayo. Since El Chapo's arrest in 2016, the Sinaloa cartel only grew and became more violent. After Ovidio was arrested in January 2023, some pretty horrific information about their preferred torture methods came to light. Once information was obtained by these captives, typically through torture, these individuals were killed, either by or at the direction of the Chapitos themselves, and the bodies disposed of throughout the area. While many of these victims were shot, others were fed dead or alive to tigers. Indeed, Ivan and Alfredo own tigers, and it's safe to say they're not kept in ideal conditions either. As to the rivals they kidnap, well, they meet endings more gruesome than any horror movie can show. In 2017, 2 of El Chapo's sons kidnapped and murdered 2 Mexican federal police officers. The testimony was truly shocking. For approximately 2 hours, members of the Chapitos tortured victim 5 by inserting a corkscrew into victim 5's muscles, ripping out one of his muscles, and placing hot chilies in the open wounds and nose, before being shot dead by Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, the indictment alleges. The victim and his fellow slain officer were then dumped near a motel off of a highway near the ranch. Apparently, Los Chapitos' favorite torture methods include electrocution and waterboarding, and they do this to anyone: rival sicarios, police officers, and people who fail to pay debts. And to make matters worse, sometimes Los Chapitos test out the potency of their fentanyl on their prisoners. DEA Chief Ann Milgram said, "Death and destruction are central to their whole operation. The Sinaloa cartel is a network that fuels violence and death on both sides of the border." Just like any other drug lord, Los Chapitos' main goal is to spread fear and the message that they're not to be messed with. Fear is their only currency. So now you may ask, how do these people get so low? How does someone end up a torturer on a cartel's payroll? Sadly, smart cartel leaders work hard to brainwash young sicarios into thinking they're doing the right thing.
Do you consider yourselves kind of like terrorists?
No, nomás lo que hacemos, nada de otro tipo de acto contra la sociedad que esté mal.
A couple of days ago in Culiacan, a police officer was kidnapped. I suppose to me that seemed like acts of terrorism, you know, if you're kidnapping police.
Pues usted no sabe qué puede hacer el policía. Muchas veces un policía corrupto que hacen cosas indebidas, pero alguna razón haber tenido para ese hecho, no a nadie lo levanta nomás por puras ganas.
Yeah, blame the victim. The problem is, cartels recruit very young boys from poor, uneducated backgrounds. In their minds, sicarios are these cool, powerful men who have money and respect. They're role models for them because they still don't know the true level of their brutality.
¿Cuáles son sus nombres?
Eric y Manuel.
Eric y Manuel. ¿De dónde son originarios?
De Reynosa, Tamaulipas.
¿Qué piensan hacer?
Vamos a hacer del cartel del Golfo.
El cartel del Golfo. ¿No quieres estudiar tú, joven?
No, eso ya es para niños chiquitos.
¿No te importa el estudio?
No, nada.
And then when they discover the brutality, it's too late to turn back. They're forced to engage in it and become desensitized to violence.
I was going on 13 years old the first time I took a life. It's just one day, got invited to Mexico. I didn't know what was going on at first. And I see about 6 people kneeling down. Then the individual, the person in charge, they start laughing. And I think they saw that scared, panicked look in my face and asked me if I had ever killed somebody.
The cartels imbue their young recruits with fear and a sense of kill or be killed. If you want to look powerful and have the cartel's respect, you have to maim and kill for them. If you can't do it, you might end up like your dead enemies.
I've done the simple stuff that everybody starts doing, pulling teeth out, cutting fingers up slowly, or...
And the final initiation ritual is always murder.
He pulled out a handgun, told me to kill that person, the one kneeling in front of him. And I just shot him. And he said he was putting me on his payroll.
The Network for the Rights of Children in Mexico estimates that there are over 35,000 children and teens involved in cartels. And when they get inducted, if they refuse to kill, torture, or dismember, they are often killed on the spot. So yeah, most torturers start out like this.
¿Cuántos años tienes? 14. ¿Dónde te detuvieron? ¿Dónde te agarraron?
En el aeropuerto.
¿A dónde ibas? ¿A dónde ibas?
A San Diego,
¿Con quién ibas?
con mi hermana,
¿A los cuántos años empezaste a ejecutar?
los 11.
Edgar was 11 when he started decapitating his victims, all for the promise of quick cash. It's a game of survival of the fittest, and no one is the winner. The toughest, vilest, most psychopathic of the soldiers make it through their teenage years and survive the very dangerous game. But they end up desensitized monsters who are so far removed from what it means to be human, they don't really enjoy life anymore.
You know, it's like another human being. Does that ever weigh on the conscience? You know, you think about it.
Pues no. No es difícil porque si no lo llevan a uno.
Will there ever be an end to narco torture when the cartels keep producing people like this? Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about the brutal world of cartels? Do you know of other terrifying torture methods? Let us know in the comments, and before you go, make sure you like and subscribe. See you next time.